Have you ever wondered what American schools were really like in the 1980s? No cell phones, no social media, no Google to save you from a tough homework question, just the ringing of the morning bell, up sharp and loud at 8 a.m., and the sound of sneakers on linoleum floors. As students rushed to their first class, the 1980s were a strange and beautiful turning point in American education, caught between the old world and the new. Chalkboards met calculators, typewriters shared space with the first whispers of computers, and in the middle of it all were the students. Down, growing up in a world that felt both structured and uncertain. School back then wasn't just a place to learn math or English. It was a mirror, a reflection of everything America believed in and everything it didn't talk about. So let's go back to 1985. Let's step into a public school classroom, desks in perfect rows, green chalkboard at the front, the hum of fluorescent lights above, no phones, no distractions, just pencil, paper, and pressure. A typical day started around 8 o'clock. Students arrived by those iconic yellow school buses or in boxy station wagons with wood paneling down the sides. Inside, the schedule moved like clockwork, 6 or 7 classes a day, each lasting about 45 to 50 minutes. English, math, science, social studies, and then the electives. Home economics, where students learned to sew or cook. Typing class, where fingers danced across clunky keyboards. Woodshop, auto repair. Up real-life skills for real-life people. Textbooks were thick, heavy, and a little yellowed, pages worn from years of use. Notes were handwritten, blue ink, sometimes with little hearts or doodles in the margins. And tests? They were on paper, graded by hand, and returned with red marks that made your stomach twist. Grades ran from A to F. An A was gold. A C meant average. And an F, an A for could ruin your week. There was no online homework, no PDF study guides. If you didn't know something, you either asked the teacher or you hoped someone at the library did. Around noon, the bell rang again. Lunchtime, the cafeteria came alive. Metal trays clattered, lines moved slowly. The smell of overcooked pizza. Plastic milk cartons. Mystery meat Thursdays. Students filed in, heads on swivels, not just thinking about food, but about where to sit. Because in the cafeteria, more than anywhere else, down, you knew your place. The football team had their table. The drama kids had theirs. The popular girls sat near the windows, while the loners, the shy ones, the outcasts, took whatever space was left. No one said it out loud, but everyone understood the rules. The lunchroom wasn't just about eating. It was a daily exercise in social survival. By 3 p.m., the final bell rang. Backpacks zipped, lockers slammed. Some students sprinted to catch the bus. Others walked home with friends or waited in the parking lot for a ride. A few stayed behind for sports practice, club meetings, or just to sit quietly in an empty classroom, staring out of the window as golden sunlight poured in through the blinds. It all seems so simple, so routine, but if you look closer, you'll see the truth. School in the 1980s didn't just teach algebra or sentence structure. It taught you how to read a room, how to blend in, how to disappear if you needed to, or how to stand out if you dared. It taught you that success wasn't just about being smart, but about being seen by the right people at the right time. It taught you that jeans had brands, and those brands had meaning, that the cafeteria wasn't neutral ground, it was a map, and every table was a territory. For some kids, it was just another school day, but for others, it was the beginning of something else, something deeper, the first time they felt invisible, the first time they realized school doesn't just teach you what to think, it teaches you where you belong, or worse, down where you don't. Somewhere between the ringing bells and the final grades, there was something else that defined American high schools in the 1980s. Culture, unwritten rules, shared rituals, moments that weren't in any textbook, but that everyone remembered. Let's start with the big one. Promenade. Every spring. Across the country, high school gyms and community centers were transformed. String lights, balloons, plastic champagne glasses filled with sparkling cider. Students arrived in rented tuxedos and long gowns, hair sprayed high, heels wobbling on gym floors, and limousines pulling up to school parking lots like a red carpet premiere. For some students, prom was the dream, the first slow dance, with a crush, the chance to be crowned prom king or queen, a night of photos, laughter, and for many, a quiet goodbye to childhood. But for others, it was something else entirely, a reminder of what they didn't have, who they weren't invited by, where they didn't fit in. And while the music played and couples danced, some sat on the bleachers, watching, pretending they didn't care. Beyond prom, there was student government, posters taped to lockers, campaign speeches in crowded hallways, slogans like "Vote Sarah for Secretary" or "Make senior year count, choose Mike." Running for class president wasn't just about leadership. It was about being known, being seen. And while some took it seriously, crafting speeches, organizing events, others saw it for what it was, a popularity contest, dressed up as democracy. Then came the clubs, the real heartbeat of extracurricular life. There was drama club, where students painted sets, memorized monologues, and waited backstage with trembling hands. There was debate team, where opinions turned into arguments, and arguments into trophies. There was yearbook committee, where a small group of teens decided which memories would live on forever and which ones would be forgotten. There were clubs for chess, science, poetry, marching band, and even a few brave students who formed underground LGBTQ+ support groups, hidden, quiet, but real. And of course, there were sports. In many schools, sports weren't just games, they were identity. Friday night football under the stadium lights, cheerleaders flipping, crowds screaming, school colors waving in the wind, the quarterback walking through the halls like a local celebrity, the star point guard whose name was called on the loudspeaker after every big win. To be on the team meant something. It meant your name in the announcements, your photo on the hallway wall, late-night bus rides, team jackets, pep rallies, and high fives from people who never spoke to you before. But it also meant pressure, injuries, exhaustion, and the silent fear that once the games ended, your place in the world might disappear with it. And while athletes practiced on the field, cheerleaders practiced under the bleachers, not just waving pom-poms, but learning choreography, leading chants, performing at assemblies. They were athletes too, though they weren't always seen that way. And they knew what it meant to be both celebrated and underestimated. Together, these pieces form the unofficial curriculum of high school life in the 1980s. It wasn't written in any handbook. You didn't get a grade for it, but you felt it. Every day, in the competition, to be seen, in the need, to belong, in the quiet space between who you were and who you thought you were supposed to be. Because while prom was magical, it also reminded you who got the spotlight and who didn't. While student government handed out badges, it also handed out power to those already holding it. And while sports united schools, they also divided them into those who played and those who only watched. These weren't just activities. They were lessons, unspoken but unforgettable. Lessons in confidence, lessons in rejection, lessons in identity. And whether you stood under the stadium lights or sat backstage in the dark, you were learning something about who you were and maybe who you wanted to become. Every classroom in the 1980s looked similar from the outside. Rows of desks, chalkboard in front, an American flag in the corner, fluttering above a boxy old television. But inside, the experience of being a student could be vastly different, depending on who you were. For white students, school often felt made for them. The curriculum, the traditions, even the pictures in the textbooks. But for black students, Latino students, Asian American students, and native students. The message was often more subtle and more painful. You're here, but you're not exactly written into the story. Many schools still carried the quiet remnants of segregation, not in law, but in spirit. Track classes, discipline policies, expectations. Students of color were more likely to be labeled troublemakers, less likely to be placed in honors classes, and far less likely to be seen as future leaders. Even in school plays or yearbook pages, the faces that were celebrated often looked the same. And, for some, it felt like no matter how hard they tried, they were always fighting to prove they belonged. Then there was gender. In the 1980s, boys still took shop class, while girls took home ec. Boys played football, girls cheered from the sidelines, and while Title IX had already passed, offering equal opportunities in sports and education, equality didn't always mean acceptance. A girl who joined the wrestling team might get laughed at in the locker room. A boy who joined choir might be whispered about, called names behind his back. There were boxes, and everyone was expected to stay inside them. And then there were the students who didn't fit any box. Gay students, queer students, trans students, many of whom didn't even have the words to describe how they felt. They walked the halls, stayed quiet in class, hid behind smiles, and tried not to be noticed, because being noticed could mean danger. There were no pride flags, no teachers openly offering support, no official clubs, no safe spaces. If you were different, you either kept it buried deep inside, or you risked becoming the target of whispers, laughter, or worse. But even in silence, there was resilience. Students wrote secret notes to each other, passed poems in lockers, found friendship in the margins. A glance, a nod in the hallway, a shared secret smile. Sometimes that was enough to keep going. And for some brave few, there was even defiance. A girl who refused to be told she couldn't take auto repair. A boy who wore makeup to school just once. A group of friends who sat together at lunch and didn't care what anyone thought. They didn't have parades. They didn't have platforms, but they had each other. In a time when identity was rarely discussed and often ignored, some students still found ways to exist, loudly, quietly, and everything in between, because school in the 1980s didn't just test your memory, it tested your courage. And for many, just showing up was the bravest thing they did all day. Have you ever looked at two schools and wondered how they could exist in the same country in the 1980s? That contrast was everywhere. At a glance, schools looked the same. Rows of desks, fluorescent lights, the national anthem playing through dusty intercoms. But the deeper you looked, the more you saw the divide. And that divide often came down to one thing: money. Public schools in the U.S. were and still are funded largely through local property taxes. That meant richer neighborhoods had better funded schools, and poorer ones were left behind. In suburban areas, public schools had new libraries, computer labs, and football fields that looked like college stadiums. But just a few miles away, in the inner city or rural towns, the story changed completely. Old textbooks worn and taped together, teachers who had to buy chalk and pencils with their own paychecks, bathrooms without working sinks, ceilings that leaked when it rained. For the students in those schools, it was clear they weren't just learning math and history, they were learning that they mattered less. Meanwhile, private schools painted a very different picture. Funded by tuition, sometimes thousands of dollars a year, they offered quiet hallways, small class sizes, and resources most public school kids could only dream of. Private school students wore matching uniforms, ate lunch on polished wooden tables, and went on field trips to museums and theaters, not just the local zoo. They had college counselors, SAT prep classes, guest speakers from Ivy League universities, and when they walked across the stage at graduation, there was already a seat waiting for them at the next level. But this wasn't just about luxury or about comfort. It was about access, because access changes everything. Access to working computers, access to advanced placement classes, access to teachers who have time and energy to care. In the 1980s, some parents started pushing back. They asked, why should a child's future be determined by their zip code? So came the rise of school choice, magnet programs, charter schools, voucher systems. Suddenly, parents were trying everything, transferring kids across district lines, using a grandparent's address, even lying on enrollment forms, all to give their children a better chance. But while some escaped, others were stuck, trapped in schools that were failing them, with no escape route. And the difference between these two worlds, public and private, only grew sharper with time. Two students, same age, same country. One begins their day in a classroom with working computers, projectors, and a teacher who knows their name. The other sits in a drafty room with broken blinds and hopes today won't be another substitute teacher reading from a decade-old worksheet. Both children say the Pledge of Allegiance, but only one actually sees the promises of that pledge reflected in their school. The other is left to wonder if those words were ever meant for them. And here's the hardest part to admit. That gap, it wasn't an accident. It was built brick, by policy, by funding decisions, by generations of inequality. And even today, many of those same patterns remain. But back in the 1980s, the cracks were beginning to show. The conversation was starting. Some students began to speak out. Teachers marched. Journalists wrote exposés. And though change didn't come overnight, the awareness grew. Because a society that says it values education cannot afford to ignore the walls crumbling around its children. And for every kid who sat in a crowded public school class and still made it out, there were 10 more who didn't. That's the part we don't always see. That's the real cost of inequality. Because education isn't just about what's taught in a classroom. It's about what that classroom says about a child's worth. And in the 1980s, depending on where you lived, what your parents made, or the color of your skin, your school might be telling you something very different. So maybe the next time we walk past a school, no matter how small, how forgotten, how worn, we remember this. Behind every crumbling wall, there's a story. Behind every desk, a child who deserves more. If this story moved you, if you believe stories like this matter, please consider subscribing to our channel. Here, we bring forgotten chapters of America's past back to life, one story at a time. Hit the bell icon so you won't miss what comes next. And as always, thank you for watching.